October 8th, 1918. The Argonne Forest, France. A patrol of 17 American soldiers has just stumbled directly into a German machine gun position and walked straight into a trap. Within minutes, their commanding officer is dead. Half the patrol is dead or wounded. The men left alive are pinned down, surrounded, with no clear way out. Command falls to a corporal who, less than 2 years earlier, had tried to avoid the draft entirely on religious grounds. He believed killing was a sin. By the end of the next 20 minutes, that corporal will have killed more than 20 enemy machine gunners and single-handedly captured 132 German prisoners, one of the single most extraordinary feats of the entire war. His name is Alvin York. This is his story. Alvin Cullum York was born in 1887 in the mountains of Fentress County, Tennessee, one of 11 children in a poor farming family living in a 2-room log cabin. Like most mountain boys of his time, York grew up hunting from an early age, not for sport, but for survival, to help feed his large family. By adulthood, York had become an exceptional marksman, known throughout the county for winning local turkey shoots and shooting matches. It was a skill built entirely out of necessity, one that no one, least of all York himself, could have imagined would one day make him a legend on a European battlefield. But York's younger years weren't defined by discipline. He was known locally as a hard drinker and a brawler, someone who spent more time in saloons and card games across the state line in Kentucky than in church. Friends and family later described him as capable but aimless, a young man with real talent and no direction for it. That changed around 1915, when a close friend of York's was killed in a bar fight. The death shook him deeply. In the aftermath, York underwent what he would later describe as a genuine spiritual awakening, joining a small, strict pacifist Christian church called the Church of Christ in Christian Union. He gave up drinking and fighting entirely almost overnight, and threw himself into his new faith with the same intensity he'd once brought to saloons and card tables. For York, this wasn't a minor lifestyle adjustment. It became the defining moral framework for the rest of his life. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, and the draft began, York faced a genuine crisis of conscience. His church's teachings held that violence and killing were fundamentally against God's will. Full stop, no exceptions. York attempted to register as a conscientious objector, writing directly on his draft card that his religious convictions prevented him from fighting. His request was denied. The Army didn't officially recognize York's small independent church as an exempted religious denomination under the law, and York was drafted into the 82nd Infantry Division at Camp Gordon, Georgia. What followed was months of genuine spiritual anguish. York later described long conversations with his commanding officers over the morality of war, citing Bible passages against violence and killing. His officers, in turn, countered with other scripture, arguing that some fights were justified, even righteous, pointing to passages about defending the innocent and standing against tyranny. York wasn't convinced easily. He was given leave to return home to Tennessee, where he spent days in isolation on a mountainside near his family's farm, praying, fasting, and wrestling with the question that had consumed him for months. Could a man who believed killing was a sin still go to war? By his own account, York came away from that mountainside with a personal peace he hadn't expected to find. He'd come to believe that he could serve, that he could fight, if he trusted the cause was just, and that he was, in his words, an instrument being used for a greater purpose. He returned to his unit changed, resolved, and at peace with a decision that would be tested in the most extreme way imaginable just months later. York shipped out to France in the spring of 1918 as part of the American Expeditionary Forces, training for the brutal trench warfare that had already devastated a generation of European soldiers over 4 grinding years of conflict. By this point in the war, the fresh manpower of the United States was finally helping to tip the balance on the exhausted Western Front, and American units were being pushed rapidly into major offensives that European armies could no longer sustain alone. York's unit, the 82nd Division, was assigned to one of the largest and deadliest operations in American military history, the Meuse Argonne Offensive. It involved over 1 million U.S. soldiers and was aimed at finally breaking Germany's fortified defensive lines for good in what would become the final major push of the entire war. By early October 1918, York's battalion had run into a heavily fortified German machine gun position dug into high ground overlooking a valley, a position that was systematically cutting down American troops attempting to advance below. A small patrol, including York, was ordered to work around behind German lines through the forest and take the position out from the rear. It was a mission that, by every reasonable expectation, should have ended in disaster. The patrol worked its way quietly through dense forest and unexpectedly came out directly behind a German headquarters position, catching a group of German soldiers eating breakfast completely by surprise. The Americans moved quickly and captured this entire group without firing a single shot. For a brief moment, it must have felt like the mission had succeeded almost too easily. But the commotion had alerted a much larger German machine gun unit positioned on higher ground nearby. Before the Americans could regroup, a devastating burst of machine gun fire tore through the clearing. In the initial burst, the American patrol's commanding officer was killed instantly, along with several other soldiers. Roughly half the patrol was killed or wounded within seconds. The survivors were pinned down in the open, with nowhere to retreat and no clear way to fight back against multiple entrenched machine gun positions. Command, by default, fell to the highest-ranking man still able to act, Corporal Alvin York. With his remaining men assigned to guard the German prisoners already captured, York found himself essentially alone against a fortified machine gun position under direct fire from multiple angles. He didn't panic, and he didn't retreat. Instead, using the same patient, methodical marksmanship he'd built hunting squirrels and turkeys in the Tennessee mountains as a boy, York began picking off German machine gunners one at a time, using natural cover, controlled breathing, and precise, deliberate shots rather than blind, panicked firing. Witnesses later testified that York worked through gun position after gun position with an almost eerie calm, reloading, repositioning slightly, firing again, each shot finding its mark. At one critical point during the engagement, a group of 6 German soldiers, realizing they had a clear angle, charged directly at York with bayonets fixed, hoping to overwhelm him before he could reload his rifle. York, having run out of rifle ammunition in that direction, drew his pistol. By his own later account, he made a split-second tactical decision. He shot the attacking soldiers starting from the rear of the group and working forward, so that the men still charging toward him wouldn't immediately realize their comrades behind them had already fallen, buying him crucial extra seconds. Facing continued, disciplined fire and mounting losses, and believing, incorrectly, that they were up against a much larger American force, the German officer in command of the position made the decision to surrender, rather than continue losing men to an enemy he couldn't even see clearly. York and his surviving comrades then marched a staggering 132 German prisoners back through active enemy lines to American positions, a feat so extraordinary that it needed to be independently verified by multiple officers before headquarters believed the reported numbers. For this single action, Alvin York would receive the Medal of Honor, along with France's Croix de Guerre and Legion of Honor, and decorations from several other allied nations, becoming, almost overnight, one of the most celebrated soldiers of the entire war. York returned home in 1919 to a level of fame that genuinely stunned him. He was celebrated as one of the greatest heroes of the entire war, given a massive homecoming parade, and flooded with offers, endorsement deals, film proposals, speaking tours that could have made him extremely wealthy almost overnight. York turned nearly all of it down, consistent with the values that had shaped his entire adult life. York believed it would be wrong to personally profit from an act he saw simply as doing his duty under God. He returned to rural Tennessee, married his longtime sweetheart Gracie Williams, and largely avoided cashing in on his own legend for years, even while continuing to live in real financial hardship on his small farm. Instead, York used his platform for something personally meaningful to him: education. Having grown up with almost no formal schooling himself in an isolated mountain community, York spent much of the rest of his life raising funds and pushing for the establishment of better schools for children in the Appalachian region he came from. His efforts eventually helped establish an agricultural institute in Tennessee that continues to operate to this day, educating children from the same mountain communities York himself came from. It wasn't until the late 1930s, during the lingering hardship of the Great Depression, that financial pressure finally led York to agree to a Hollywood film about his story. The 1941 film Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper, became one of the highest-grossing films of that year and reintroduced York's story to an entire new generation of Americans, just as the country was on the brink of entering a Second World War. Alvin York died in 1964, still living not far from the mountains where he'd grown up. He never fully embraced the war hero identity the country had given him. Those who knew him in his later years said he remained, at heart, a quiet, humble farmer, far prouder of the schools he'd helped build than the medals kept in his drawer. What makes York's story remarkable isn't just what happened in that forest clearing in October of 1918. It's the internal journey that got him there. A man who genuinely believed killing was a sin, who fought that belief honestly, rather than simply avoiding the question or hiding behind it, and who ultimately became one of the most effective soldiers in American history, without ever losing the moral seriousness that shaped him from the start. York didn't see himself as extraordinary. He saw himself as an ordinary man who did what he came to believe was right, under the most impossible circumstances imaginable. Whether or not you agree with the conclusion he ultimately reached, it's hard not to respect just how honestly he wrestled with the question, and how consistently he lived by the answer for the rest of his life. If this story moved you, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there's another forgotten hero waiting for you next week on Battlefield Chronicles. And if you think someone else needs to hear this story too, share this video with them. These stories deserve to be remembered, and that only happens if we keep passing them on. Drop a comment and let me know who you want covered next. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.